The rain was a coward's apology, thin and weeping against the penthouse window. It did nothing to wash away the scent of him, sandalwood and ozone and something metallic he probably wasn't even aware of, the smell of power. Alara stood with her hand on the cold brass doorknob, the weight of her decision a physical stone in her stomach. It was a choice she had to make. It was the only choice. "Don't," he said. His voice, usually a low, steady rumble that could soothe markets or command lethal obedience, was fractured. Just that one word splintered around the edges. She didn't turn. She couldn't. If she saw the look in his eyes, the one she'd come to crave, the one that stripped away the kingpin and revealed the lonely man beneath, she would shatter. Her principles, her self-preservation, all of it would turn to dust. "I can't stay here, Jason," she whispered to the door, to the city bleeding lights below. "I can't be the woman who sleeps in a bed bought with that." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. It was filled with the ghosts of what they almost had and the monsters of what he actually was. The silence was worse than any shouting. It was an admission. "I would burn it all down for you," he finally said, the words raw, torn from a place he kept locked away from the world. A sob caught in her throat, hot and sharp. That was the problem. He would, and she would let him, and they would both be consumed by the flames. She knew it. "I know," she choked out, and the sound was the most painful she had ever made. "That's why I have to go." With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Alara Vance turned the knob and walked out of the gilded cage, leaving the man who owned the city standing alone in the ruins of what might have been. The click of the lock behind her was the sound of a heart breaking. 2 of them. 3 weeks earlier, Alara's world was not one of penthouses and broken hearts. It was a world of steam wands, the bittersweet smell of ground coffee beans, and the constant, dull ache in her feet. She worked 2 jobs, barista from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon at the Daily Grind, a perpetually bustling cafe that served caffeine to the city's ambitious and exhausted. Then, from 4 until 10, she was a stockist at a high-end art supply store, a form of exquisite torture where she was surrounded by vibrant pigments and fine bristled brushes she could barely afford. Her life was a carefully constructed fortress of necessity, built brick by brick with paychecks that vanished into rent, utilities, and the occasional tube of ultramarine blue. Her apartment, a space she generously shared with her best friend Maya, and a temperamental radiator, was more studio than living space. Canvases leaned against every wall, their blank white faces a constant silent demand for the time and energy she rarely had. This particular Tuesday was a masterpiece of mediocrity. A customer had yelled at her because his soy latte was, in his esteemed opinion, insufficiently foamy. Her manager had given her a lecture on the importance of upselling pastries, as if her $5 an hour tip income hinged on convincing hedge fund interns to buy a croissant. And now she was supposed to be celebrating. "It's not a celebration, it's a consolation dinner," Ilara corrected Maya, who was attempting to apply mascara in the reflection of their toaster. "I didn't get the grant. Again. This is just an excuse to eat something that wasn't cooked in our microwave." Maya blotted her lips, her expression softening. "You're a brilliant artist and the grant committee are blind fool's dinner, and I'm paying. So you're putting on that black dress, the one that makes you look like you could commit a felony and get away with it, and we are going to Lysiel." Alara groaned. Lysiel was a restaurant so far out of their financial stratosphere it might as well have been on the moon. Reservations were a myth, and the price of an appetizer could cover her electricity bill. "Maya, no, we can't afford that. Let's just go get noodles." "I have a coupon," Maya said, waving a piece of paper with triumphant flair. 50% off. My boss got it for landing the Henderson account, and he hates French food. It's fate, Alara. The universe is telling you to eat a tiny portion of exquisitely arranged food for a still exorbitant price. Alara looked from the coupon to Maya's hopeful face. Defeat was inevitable, Maya's brand of optimistic bulldozing was an unstoppable force. An hour later, Alara found herself standing under the opulent, crystal-draped awning of Le Ciel, feeling profoundly out of place. The black dress did, admittedly, make her feel powerful, but it was a borrowed power, a costume that would turn back into a pumpkin-colored barista apron at 6 a.m. The inside of the restaurant was a hushed cathedral of wealth. Soft lighting gleamed off polished silver and whispered over velvet seating. The air itself seemed expensive. A host, a man with a smile as thin and brittle as a shard of glass, glided toward them. His eyes flickered over Maya, then settled on Ilara, and his smile tightened into something that was not a smile at all. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he very much doubted it. "Reservation for 2 under Williams," Maya said brightly, either oblivious to or willfully ignoring the man's condescension. The host tapped at a screen on his lectern, his movements slow and deliberate. "Williams? I don't seem to have a reservation under that name." "It might be under Henderson," Maya offered. "It was a corporate booking." He tapped again, his disdain now palpable. "No, nothing." He looked up, his gaze lingering on Alara's face, on her intricate braids, on the simple fact of her blackness in this temple of white linen. "Perhaps you have the wrong night, or the wrong restaurant." Alara's spine stiffened. She knew this tone. It was the polite cousin of a slur, the well-dressed version of an insult. It was designed to make you feel small, to make you question your own right to exist in a space. "I'm sure we're in the right place," Maya insisted, her own smile finally faltering as she caught the vibe. "We have a voucher." She held it out. The host barely glanced at it. "Vouchers are for our lunch service, on weekdays." He was lying. Alara could see it in the slight twitch of his eye. He was enjoying this. "Look," Ilara said, her voice low and steady, drawing on a well of exhaustion and defiance she carried with her everywhere. "Just find the reservation, or tell us you don't want to serve us so we can leave." The host's face flushed a blotchy red. "There is no need for that kind of attitude. We are fully booked, as you can see." He gestured vaguely at the half-empty dining room. It was in that moment of quiet, humiliating tension that Alara felt it. A gaze, heavy, intense, and utterly consuming. It wasn't the curious glance of another diner. This felt different. It felt like being seen, truly seen, down to the bone. She turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning the room, and then she found him. He was sitting alone at the best table in the house, a corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. He was Korean, devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost violent. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and dark, fathomless eyes that were fixed entirely on her. He wore a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin, the color of a midnight storm. There was an aura of stillness around him, a predatory calm that made him the center of gravity in the room. Even from across the floor, Alara could feel the immense, coiled power he held in that stillness. When their eyes met, the low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into nothing. It was just the sneering host, the hum of her own anger, and the magnetic pull of that man's stare. Jae-Soon Kwon hated restaurants like Le Ciel. He hated the performative deference of the staff, the cloying scent of truffle oil, the way people spoke in hushed, conspiratorial tones, as if sharing state secrets instead of gossiping about their neighbors. He came here for one reason: anonymity. In his own establishments, he was the owner, the boss, the feared head of the Kwon family. He was a symbol. Here, he was just another rich man in a suit, and the solitude was a luxury more valuable than anything on the menu. His uncle, Minjun, had insisted on a meeting earlier that day. It had been the usual dance. Minjun, with his traditionalist views and barely veiled contempt for Jae-Soon's more modern approach, had pushed for more aggressive expansion into territories held by their rivals. He spoke of honor and strength, but his words were coated in the familiar slime of greed and bloodlust. "You are soft, nephew," Min Jun had said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Your father, he would have crushed the Antonelli family by now. He would have made an example of them. You negotiate. You make deals. This is not our way." Jason had let the words wash over him, his expression impassive. He had inherited this world from his father, a throne built on shadows and fear. He ran the Quan Syndicate with ruthless efficiency, not because he enjoyed it, but because it was his duty, his burden. The intricate dragon tattoo that snaked across his back and over his shoulder was a permanent reminder of the legacy inked into his very skin. He was lonely in a way that only the truly powerful could be, surrounded by people, but utterly isolated by the nature of his life. He'd come to Le Ciel to escape the lingering stain of his uncle's ambition, to drink a glass of scotch that cost more than most people's groceries, and to stare at the city that he effectively owned but could never truly be a part of. And then he saw her. She walked in, and the entire composition of the room shifted. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. She was, but it was more than that. It was the way she held herself, a defiant grace in a space designed to intimidate. He watched the exchange with the host, saw the subtle racism, the dismissive wave of the hand. He saw the fire ignite in her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin. Most people, when faced with that kind of casual cruelty, either shrank or became loud. She did neither. She became sharper, more focused, her dignity a shield and a weapon. He felt a jolt, a shocking, unfamiliar sensation that was equal parts recognition and possession. It was as if a dormant part of his soul had been struck by lightning. The world, which had been a muted gray of obligation and loneliness, suddenly flooded with color, and it was all centered on her. He had seen thousands of beautiful women. He had dated them, dismissed them, forgotten them. This was different. This was a seismic event. Section Jinwoo Park, his second in command and the closest thing he had to a friend, would have called it an unacceptable security risk, an emotional variable. But Jinwoo wasn't here. It was just Jae-sun, a glass of scotch, and the sudden undeniable certainty that he was not going to let that woman walk out of this restaurant. He watched her say something that made the host's face tighten, and he knew it was time. He raised a single elegant finger. The restaurant manager, a man who knew exactly who Jae-sun Kwon was and what his patronage meant, was at his side in an instant. "Mr. Kwon, is everything to your satisfaction?" the manager asked, his voice trembling slightly. Jae-sun didn't look at him. His eyes remained locked on the woman. "There seems to be a misunderstanding at the door," he said, his voice a low command. "My guests have arrived." The manager's eyes widened. He followed Jae-sun's gaze to the entrance, to the two women, one of whom was black, arguing with his host. Comprehension and terror dawned on his face simultaneously. Ilara heard the frantic scuttling of expensive shoes on marble. The manager was suddenly beside the host, his face pale. "What is the meaning of this, Jean-Pierre? These are Mr. Kwon's guests." The host, Jean-Pierre, looked as if he'd been slapped. His eyes darted from the manager to Jae-sun's table and the color drained from his face. "Mr. Kwon, but they—" Ilara felt a wave of confusion. "Mr. Kwon!" She looked back at the man in the corner booth. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable but intense. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an invitation. "My sincerest apologies, ladies," the manager stammered, bowing so low he was in danger of toppling over. "A terrible mistake. Jean-Pierre is new. Please, right this way. Mr. Kwon is waiting." Maya was gaping, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Ilara was frozen. Who was this man, and why had he just claimed them? It was a power play, clear and simple, and every instinct she had screamed at her to reject it. She hated being a pawn, a damsel, a project. "I think not," Ilara said, her voice clear and ringing in the now silent entryway. "We wouldn't want to impose." The manager looked like he was about to have a heart attack. From across the room, the man spoke. His voice carried effortlessly, a low baritone that cut through the tension. "It's no imposition." Every head in the restaurant turned. "The love of God, just go to the table. The love of God, just go to the table," she hissed. "That guy looks like he could buy the building and fire everyone in it before his appetizer arrives." Against her better judgment, propelled by Maya's frantic pushing and the weight of 100 curious stares, Alara found herself walking across the plush carpet toward the corner booth. The closer she got, the more potent his presence became. She could see the faint, silvery line of a scar that traced his jaw, a stark imperfection on a face that was otherwise flawless. She could see the dark intelligence in his eyes. He rose as they approached, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed at odds with the dangerous energy radiating from him. "Please," he said, gesturing to the seats opposite him. They sat. The silence was deafening. A waiter appeared as if by magic, pouring them champagne from a bottle that Alara knew cost more than her share of the rent. "I'm Jae-sun Kwon," he said, his eyes still on Alara, completely ignoring Maya. It wasn't rude, just absolute. His focus was a laser beam, and she was the target. "Alara Vance," she said, her voice tight. "And this is my friend Maya." He gave Maya a brief, polite nod before his attention snapped back to Alara. "Alara," he repeated, tasting the name. "It's a pleasure." "Why did you do that?" she asked, skipping the pleasantries. She needed to understand the dynamics of what had just happened. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "I don't like bullies," he said simply. "And you are?" she countered, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "A professional nice guy?" The smile became a little more real. Something like that. It was a lie. A beautiful, well-dressed, and utterly transparent lie. Alara Vance didn't know who Jae-sun Kwon was, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he was not a nice guy. He was something else entirely, something dangerous, and for some terrifying reason, he had decided he wanted her at his table. The dinner that followed was the strangest meal of Alara's life. Exquisite courses appeared before them, dishes so artfully constructed they looked more like sculptures than food. Maya, after her initial shock, embraced the sheer absurdity of the situation, chatting happily about her job in marketing and praising the seared scallops with an almost religious fervor. Jae-sun was a gracious host, nodding and asking the right questions, but his attention never truly wavered from Alara. He asked about her, not the superficial questions people usually asked. He didn't ask what she did for a living right away. He asked what she was passionate about. "What do you see when you look at the city?" he asked, his dark eyes watching her over the rim of his glass. The question caught her off guard. "I see lines," she found herself saying, the artist in her overriding her caution. "Geometric shapes, the grid of the streets, the rectangles of the windows. And I see the contrast, the cold, hard steel against the soft, temporary lights. I see 1,000 stories stacked on top of each other, all trying to get to the sky." He listened with an unnerving stillness, his focus so complete she felt like the only person in the universe. "And what story do you want to tell?" "Mine," she said, the word holding more weight than she intended. "The one that isn't about steel and glass, the one that's about the people in the shadows of those buildings." For the first time, his smile reached his eyes. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a startling warmth. The effect was like a punch to the chest. It stole her breath. He knew he was moving too fast. Jin-woo's voice of caution was a faint echo in his mind. Variables, complications, civilians are a liability. But logic had deserted him the moment he saw her. He was operating on an instinct he hadn't felt in years, a primal, possessive urge that had nothing to do with business or strategy. It was simple. He wanted her. He wanted to know the stories she saw in the city. He wanted to be the reason for the fire in her eyes, not the anger. When the meal ended, he insisted on arranging a car for them. "That's not necessary," Alara said quickly. "We can take the subway." The thought of being indebted to him, even for a car ride, prickled at her independence. "It's late," he stated, not as a suggestion, but as a fact. "The car is already here." He walked them to the curb, where a gleaming black sedan idled, its driver holding the door open. The disgraced host, Jean-Pierre, stood by the entrance, his face a mask of misery. Jason didn't even glance at him. To Ilara. "I'd like to see you again." To Ilara. "I'd like to see you again." "I don't think that's a good idea," she said honestly. Their worlds were too different. She could feel it, a chasm between his quiet, absolute power and her daily grinding struggle. "Why not?" "We have nothing in common." "We both breathe," he countered, a hint of dry humor in his voice. "We both dislike that host. It's a start." He reached into his suit jacket and produced a slim, elegant business card. It was made of heavy black metal, his name, and a single phone number engraved in silver. "Call me. Or don't, but I hope you do." He placed the card in her hand. His fingers brushed against hers, and a jolt of pure electricity shot up her arm. It was startling, undeniable. His skin was cool, but the energy beneath it was scorching. She snatched her hand back as if burned. She and Maya got into the car without another word. As it pulled away, Ilara looked back through the rear window. Jae-sun Kwon was still standing on the sidewalk, watching them go, a solitary, powerful figure against the glittering backdrop of the city he seemed to own. The pursuit began the next day. Ilara was behind the counter at the Daily Grind, wrestling with a faulty espresso machine, when a delivery man arrived with a bouquet of flowers so large it required its own dolly. They were peonies, the color of a blushing sunset, her absolute favorite. There was no card, but she knew. She told the delivery man to take them to the nearest hospital. 2 days later, a gift certificate for $5,000 to the art supply store where she worked arrived via courier. It was addressed to her personally. Her manager's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. Ilara marched to the post office on her lunch break and mailed it back to the address on the envelope, a corporate headquarters for a company called Kwon Holdings. She included a note. "I buy my own paint." He was trying to buy her, to overwhelm her with wealth, and it had the opposite effect. It solidified her resolve. It proved her point. Their worlds were incompatible. Jae-sun was not deterred. He was intrigued. No one had ever returned his money. No one had ever refused his gifts. Women usually fell over themselves for a fraction of the attention he was showing her. Her resistance was a puzzle he was determined to solve. He realized his initial approach, the one that worked in his world of transactions and leverage, was wrong. She wasn't a business deal. So he changed tactics. He showed up at the coffee shop. He didn't come in a fancy car or with an entourage. He just walked in one afternoon, dressed in dark jeans and a simple gray Henley shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. The casual clothes did nothing to diminish his presence. If anything, they made him seem more dangerous, like a predator stripped of its ceremonial trappings. He stood in line like a normal person. When it was his turn, Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice impressively steady. "A black coffee," he said. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "And 5 minutes of your time." "I'm working." "I'll wait." He took his coffee to a small table in the corner and sat. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't read a newspaper. He just sat there, nursing his coffee, and watched her. It wasn't creepy or leering. It was patient, attentive, as if he had all the time in the world and had chosen to spend it just being in the same room as her. It was far more unnerving than the flowers. When her shift ended, he was still there. She untied her apron, her hands trembling slightly, and walked over to his table. "This is creepy," she said bluntly. "Is it?" he asked, his expression genuinely curious. "I was told this is what's known as making an effort." "Making an effort is asking someone out. Staking out their workplace is what gets you a restraining order." He considered this for a moment. "Then let me rephrase. Ilara Vance, would you have dinner with me? At a place of your choosing. No Michelin stars, no dress code. My treat." She should have said no. Every rational thought in her head screamed it. He was a walking red flag, a complication she didn't need, but his eyes were sincere. And beneath the power and the wealth, she sensed something else, a profound loneliness that resonated with a hidden part of her own. "Fine," she heard herself say. "One dinner, but you're not choosing the place." "I am." She chose a tiny, family-run Ethiopian restaurant in her neighborhood, a place with mismatched furniture, communal platters, and no chance of being seen by the city's elite. It was a test. He arrived on time, dressed down again, and didn't blink an eye at the chaotic, vibrant atmosphere. He listened intently as she explained how to eat with the injera bread, followed her lead, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the food. He didn't talk about his business or his money. He talked about growing up in Seoul, about the pressure of his family, speaking in vague but poignant terms about a destiny he hadn't chosen for himself. She found herself opening up in return. She told him about her dream of being a full-time artist, about the frustration of pouring all her creativity into latte art instead of canvases. She talked about her mother, who worried constantly and wished Ilara had chosen a more stable career path like nursing. "She just wants you to be safe," Jae-sun said quietly, his insight surprising her. "I know," Ilara admitted, "but I don't want to be just safe. I want to be alive." His gaze intensified. "I understand that more than you know." The wall she had so carefully constructed around her heart began to crumble. This man was more than his money. He was intelligent, surprisingly witty, and he listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had before. He walked her home, the streets of her neighborhood a world away from the polished sidewalks outside Le Ciel. When they reached the steps of her building, a comfortable silence fell between them. "I had a nice time," she said, and was shocked to realize she meant it. "So did I," he said. He didn't try to kiss her. He just looked at her, his expression soft in the dim glow of the street lamp. "Your art gallery show, it's next Friday, isn't it?" Ilara froze. How did you know about that?" She hadn't mentioned it. Guarded. "I have an interest in the local guarded." "I have an interest in the local art scene." The chill returned. Of course, a man like him wouldn't leave things to chance. He'd had her investigated. He knew where she worked, where she lived, and now he knew about the most important night of her fledgling career. The power imbalance between them was a chasm once more. "You shouldn't have done that, Jae-sun," she said, her voice turning cold. "You shouldn't have looked into my life." "I needed to know you were safe," he said, his own voice hardening slightly, a hint of the command she'd heard at the restaurant. "Safe from what? The high-stakes world of coffee and canvas stretching?" Her sarcasm was a shield. "This isn't going to work. We're too different." She turned and went inside before he could reply, her heart a confusing mix of disappointment and fear. Jae-sun stood on the sidewalk long after she was gone, his hands clenched into fists. He had made a mistake. He was used to having information, to controlling every variable. It was how he stayed alive. But with her, the rules were different. His methods, the very tools of his survival, were pushing her away. He cursed himself. He had seen a glimpse of the woman behind the armor tonight, and he had stupidly, clumsily reminded her exactly why she wore it in the first place. He attended the gallery opening. He didn't go as Jae-sun Kwon, the magnate. He slipped in through the back, a shadow among the small crowd of art students and local patrons. He saw her from across the room. She was luminous, her face alight with passion as she talked about her work to a potential buyer. He finally looked at her art. He had seen the photos in the file Jinwoo had prepared for him, but they were nothing compared to the real thing. Her paintings were vibrant, emotional, and raw. They were portraits of her neighborhood, but they were more than that. They captured the soul of the city's forgotten people, an old man on a park bench, a child playing in the spray of a fire hydrant, the exhausted face of a woman on the late-night bus. She didn't just paint what she saw, she painted what she felt. One painting in particular held him captive. It was a self-portrait, but it wasn't her face. It was a depiction of her hands, stained with paint and coffee, one hand holding a brush, the other clenched into a fist. It was a portrait of resilience, struggle, and fierce, unyielding determination. It was her. He bought it. He did it through a proxy, a well-respected art collector on his payroll, so she would never know it was him. He paid 10 times the asking price, ensuring the gallery owner would take her on as a permanent artist. It wasn't about owning the piece. It was about giving her a piece of the freedom she craved. It was the only way he knew how to support her without his world tainting hers. The sale of her painting changed everything for Alara. It wasn't just the money, though the sum was life-altering. It was the validation. Someone had seen her work, her soul on a canvas, and declared it worthy. The gallery offered her a solo exhibition. For the first time, the dream of being a full-time artist felt real, tangible. She quit her job at the coffee shop. She knew somehow that he was responsible. It was too much of a coincidence. But this time, instead of anger, she felt a confusing wave of gratitude. He hadn't sent flowers or money. He had invested in her dream. He had seen her. She found the metal business card in her wallet, and after a long internal battle, she called him. Their relationship began in earnest after that, a secret, fragile thing. They met in quiet places, a secluded park, a late-night diner, her now spacious studio. Would watch her paint for hours. Silent would watch her paint for hours, silent and content. In those moments he wasn't a man of power. He was just Jason, a man who looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that made sense. She fell in love with him slowly, then all at once. It happened one rainy afternoon in her studio. She was struggling with a piece, frustrated and blocked. He came up behind her, gently took the brush from her hand, and set it aside. He turned her around and simply held her, his chin resting on the top of her head. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just held her, absorbing her frustration into his own immense stillness. In the safety of his arms, she felt a profound sense of peace she had never known. That was the moment she knew she was lost. The first time they were intimate, it was a revelation. He was a tender, attentive lover, his usual iron control dissolving into a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own. She traced the lines of the massive dragon tattoo on his back, her fingers mapping the intricate scales and claws that were a part of his skin, a part of him. "What does it mean?" she whispered in the dark. He was silent for a long moment. "It's a reminder," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name, "of who I am and what I can never escape." It was a warning, a confession she wasn't yet ready to hear. His world began to bleed into hers in small, unavoidable ways. A car was always waiting for her now, no matter the time. Reservations at impossible-to-book restaurants materialized with a single phone call from him. She tried to resist, to hold on to her independence, but the sheer gravitational pull of his influence was immense. The real danger, however, remained a shadow at the edge of her perception. She knew his family was in acquisitions and private equity, a vague corporate term that explained his wealth, but not the constant tension in his shoulders or the way he always positioned himself with his back to a wall. She didn't press. She was afraid of the answer. She was happy, and she didn't want to shatter the beautiful, fragile world they had built. The shattering came on a Tuesday. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a rival gang attack. It was a newspaper article. Maya had left it on the kitchen table, a headline circled in red ink. Shipping magnate Anthony Antonelli found dead. Police suspect rival involvement in ongoing dock wars. Beneath the headline was a grainy photo of the crime scene, and in the background, almost out of frame, was a man in a dark suit turning away from the camera. It was blurry, indistinct, but she would have known that silhouette anywhere. The set of the shoulders, the confident stride. It was Jason. The air left her lungs. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers and crashed to the floor, splashing hot liquid and ceramic shards across the linoleum. The dock wars. Rival involvement. She had heard whispers, news reports she'd always ignored about organized crime syndicates fighting for control of the city's ports. Quan holdings, not acquisitions, not equity, extortion, violence, murder. The beautiful, fragile world exploded into a million pieces of ugly, terrifying truth. The man she loved, the man who watched her paint and held her when she was frustrated, was a gangster, a killer, the head of the Korean Mafia. He found her in her studio that evening, surrounded by her vibrant canvases, which now seemed to mock her with their color and life. She was sitting on the floor, the newspaper clipping clutched in her hand. "Ilara," he said, his voice cautious. He saw the paper and the blood drained from his face. The mask of control he wore so perfectly settled into place, but she could see the panic in his eyes. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice a dead, hollow thing. He didn't insult her intelligence by lying. He simply nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes." "The man in the article, Antonelli, did you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "My organization was responsible," he said, the words precise and cold, a businessman discussing a transaction. "It was a necessary action to prevent a war that would have cost more lives." He tried to explain. He told her about his father, about the legacy he'd been born into, the duty he couldn't escape. He told her he ran the syndicate with a code, that he was trying to steer it toward legitimacy, to clean the blood from the family name. He spoke of his uncle, Min Jun, and the old guard who resisted his changes, who craved the old ways of violence. She listened, but the words were just noise. All she could see was the dead man's name, the grainy photo, the confirmation of the darkness she had always sensed in him. "Painting," she whispered. "The realization painting," she whispered, the realization dawning like a black sun. "Where did it come from?" He flinched. The question hit him like a physical blow. "Ilara." "Where did it come from, Jason?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Was it from this? From threatening people? From killing them?" He couldn't answer. His silence was a confession. The foundation of her new life, her artistic freedom, was built on blood money. Her dream was fertilized with death. The thought made her physically ill. "I love you," he said, his voice raw and desperate. He reached for her, but she scrambled back, away from his touch. "Don't," she gasped. "Don't touch me." His hand dropped to his side. The look on his face was one of utter devastation. He had faced down men with guns, men who wanted him dead, and had never shown a flicker of fear. But her rejection, her revulsion, it broke him. That night she packed a bag and took a cab to his penthouse. She had to end it. She had to get the poison out of her life, even if it meant ripping out her own heart in the process. Which led her to the door, to the weeping rain, and the choice that was no choice at all. She walked away. The weeks that followed her departure were a special kind of hell for Jae-sun. The penthouse, once a sanctuary where her scent lingered on the pillows and her laughter echoed in his memory, became a sterile prison. He threw himself into his work with a cold, terrifying ferocity. He finalized the hostile takeover of the Antonelli family's shipping lanes, his methods so brutal and efficient that even his uncle Min Jun was taken aback. He consolidated power, eliminated threats, and made more money than ever before. But the victory was hollow. The city lights outside his window, the lights she had taught him to see as 1,000 stories, were just meaningless flickers again. Jin-woo watched his boss with growing concern. Jae-sun was colder, harder, more isolated than ever. The brief period of warmth and humanity she had brought into his life was gone, leaving behind a frozen wasteland. "You should let her go," Jin-woo advised one night, pouring them both a drink. "She's a civilian. She was never going to accept this life." "Then I will change the life," Jae-sun said, his voice flat. Jin-woo stared at him. "You can't be serious. You want to dismantle an empire your father and grandfather built? For a woman? Min Jun will have you killed." "Let him try," Jae-sun replied, his eyes dark with a resolve that chilled Jin-woo to the bone. For Ilara, the world had lost its color. She moved back into her old apartment with Maya, but the space felt cramped and stifling. She stood before her canvases, brush in hand, but saw nothing. She had made the right choice, the only. She had made the right choice, the only moral choice. But it felt like a death sentence. "You love him," Maya said gently one evening, finding Alara staring blankly at a half-finished painting. "He's a monster," Alara whispered. "Is he?" Maya countered. "Or is he a man trapped in a monstrous life?" "There's a difference." The difference was a line Alara didn't know how to draw. The confrontation happened 2 months after Alara left. Jae-sun called a full meeting of the Kwan Syndicate's family captains. He held it not in a shadowy warehouse, but in the official boardroom of Kwan Holdings, on the top floor of their skyscraper. He stood before them, not as a gangster, but as a CEO, and he laid out his plan. He was taking the organization fully legitimate. They would dissolve the enforcement divisions. They would cut ties with all illegal enterprises. They would focus on their legitimate businesses, shipping, real estate, technology, and operate entirely within the law. It would mean less profit at first. It would mean losing the power that came from fear. The room erupted in protest. At the head of the dissent was his uncle. "You are a fool," Min Jun snarled, his face purple with rage. "You disgrace your father's name. You would turn us into common businessmen at the mercy of laws and taxes? This is weakness. This is because of that woman." "This is because of me," Jae-sun said, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "I will not lead this family down a path of self-destruction. The old ways are over. This is the future. You will either accept it or you will be removed." It was a declaration of war. That night, assassins loyal to Min Jun stormed the penthouse. They were expecting to find Jae-sun alone and vulnerable. Jae-sun fought with a controlled fury, not wanting to kill him, but to keep him alive. The fight was brutal and bloody, a whirlwind of violence confined within the elegant glass-walled apartment. Jae-sun fought with a controlled fury, not for power or territory, but for a future he could barely imagine, a future with her. He took a bullet to the shoulder and a deep cut along his ribs, but he did not fall. When it was over, Min Jun's coup had failed. His uncle was disarmed and brought before him, bleeding and defeated. "You should kill me," Min Jun spat, defiant to the end. "It is our way." Jae-sun looked at his uncle, at the man who embodied the darkness he was trying to escape. Killing him would be easy. It would be tradition. But it would be a continuation of the cycle. "No," Jae-sun said, his voice heavy. He pressed a handkerchief to his bleeding shoulder. "Our way is over." He had his uncle exiled, stripped of his power and sent back to Korea in disgrace, a fate worse than death for a man like Min Jun. The message to the rest of the syndicate was clear. The change was real, and it was absolute. 3 days later, Alara heard a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He looked terrible. He was paler, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore a simple black t-shirt, and she could see the edge of a thick white bandage peeking out from his collarbone. There was a fresh, angry-looking scar on his cheekbone that hadn't been there before. He looked tired. He looked human. "Jae-sun," she breathed, her heart seizing in her chest. "It's done," he said, his voice raspy. "It's over. The syndicate. It's not what it was. I'm transitioning everything. It's a legitimate company now, or it will be. The blood money, it's being funneled into charities. Foundations for the arts, urban renewal projects in neighborhoods like this one." She stared at him, unable to process the words. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had gone to war with his own world, his own family. For her. "I'm not that man anymore, Alara," he said, and his voice broke, the iron control finally shattering completely. "I don't want to be. I can't be, not without you. I know I don't deserve you. I know I have no right to ask, but I am asking. Give me a chance. Let me build a new world. With you." Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable. all the pain, the fear, the loneliness of the past few months washed away, replaced by a wave of love so powerful it buckled her knees. This was the grand gesture. This was the change. This was a man burning down his kingdom and trying to build a new one out of the ashes, all for her. She didn't say a word. She launched herself into his arms, her hands tangling in his hair, and she kissed him. It was a desperate, frantic kiss, full of anguish and relief and the fierce, undeniable truth of their connection. It was the taste of a new beginning. He held her tightly, his wounded body trembling against hers, as if he was afraid she might disappear. He was home. They both were. 1 year later, Alara stood in the center of her own gallery. Not a shared space, but her own. The Vance Gallery was in her old neighborhood, a bright, welcoming space funded by the Kwan Arts Foundation. Her solo exhibition was a massive success. Her new paintings were different. They were still full of life and color, but now there was a profound sense of hope woven into every brushstroke. Jae-sun stood by the entrance, watching her. He wore a simple, tailored suit, but the shadows were gone from his eyes. He still walked with the confidence of a man used to power, but the predatory edge was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. His work was now a different kind of battle, one fought in boardrooms and on stock markets. It was difficult, and he had made many enemies, but it was clean. She caught his eye from across the room and smiled. He smiled back, that rare, breathtaking smile that was hers and hers alone. He had kept his promise. He had built them a new world. It wasn't perfect, and the ghosts of their past would always be there, but it was theirs. It was a world where a resilient heart and a redeemed kingpin could stand together in the light. She walked toward him, her hand finding his, their fingers lacing together. It was a story of lines and contrasts, of steel and light, just like the city. And it was just beginning. This story teaches us that love's true power isn't just in acceptance, but in its ability to inspire profound change. It suggests that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to dismantle the world they know for a chance at a better one, and that true strength is not in holding on to power, but in having the courage to let it go for what truly matters. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you were moved by Alara and Jae-sun's journey, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more dramatic stories, and sharing this video with someone who believes in the power of second chances. We have a question for you. Do you think Alara was right to leave Jae-sun after discovering the truth about his family? Or should she have stayed and tried to change him from within? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, we want you to decide. Should we explore the story of Jin-woo, the loyal second-in-command, as he navigates the new, legitimate world of the Kwan Empire? Or would you rather see a story about Maya, Ilara's best friend, who unexpectedly finds herself entangled with a reformed member of the old Antonelli crime family? Vote in the poll and let us know whose story you want to hear next.